"Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Surely each of us has at some point heard the loving yet challenging invitation of Jesus Christ. "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." This invitation is not a harsh demand, but a heartfelt whisper, a path leading to true life and complete peace. To deny oneself does not mean we must erase our personality, our dreams, or the person we are. On the contrary, it is a profound transformation from within. It is when we bravely let go of the burdens of pride, of rivalries, prejudices, and even old wounds. It is when we dare to refuse selfish desires, the easy paths that bring only fleeting joy, to make way for love and truth. And to take up one's cross is not about seeking meaningless suffering. The cross of each of us is our daily responsibilities and duties, the difficulties and challenges that life brings. It could be patience with a loved one, forgiveness for another's mistake, honesty at work, or simply a smile, a word of encouragement given when we ourselves are weary. To carry the cross is to courageously face, accept, and sanctify these burdens with love, turning them into steps that lead us closer to God. The path of following the Lord is a long journey, an exodus from our small selves to enter the land of love and service. It is a narrow road, but it is the only road that leads to a fulfilling life. As one theologian reflected, the cross is not the end point, but the beginning of a great transformation. Therefore, each morning as we wake, let us courageously say yes to the Lord, ready to take up the cross of our lives with a hopeful heart. For on this journey, we are never alone, for He Himself walks with us, sharing the weight of our cross. The call to take up the cross and follow the teacher that we have reflected on is not a barren, stony path, but an art of living, a spiritual journey full of color and depth. It is not a sentence, but a map leading to the treasure of true freedom and a peaceful soul. Every step on this path, every burden we choose to bear out of love, is a beautiful stroke in the painting of life, with God as the master artist. To understand this wondrous path more deeply, let us contemplate philosophies drawn from this teaching, through dialogues on the dusty roads of ancient Galilee, between Jesus and souls thirsting for truth. Before we begin, we kindly invite you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel to help spread this valuable content to your family and friends. We thank you, and now we invite you to listen. 1. To deny oneself is not to destroy oneself, but to rediscover oneself. We often fear the words deny or renounce, thinking they mean losing ourselves. But Jesus teaches us that what we need to renounce is the shell of the false self, pride, ego, fears, idols, and selfish ambitions. When we dare to shed this shell, we find our true selves, a beautiful creation made in the image of God, with an unshakable worth and dignity. This idea was beautifully expressed on the way to Capernaum, when Peter asked Jesus, "Teacher, how can I become the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus smiled, looked into his zealous eyes and said, "Peter, look at your boat. When it is filled with your own things, the nets of ambition, the barrels of pride, it becomes heavy and cannot go far. But when you empty it to welcome me and your brothers, the boat is not empty. It becomes the boat of the kingdom of heaven, gliding lightly to shores you have never dreamed of. To deny is not to empty the boat, but to fill it with eternal treasures." 2. The cross is not a punishment, but an instrument of transformation. The cross is not random suffering sent from above, but the specific circumstances of our lives. An illness, a broken relationship, a failure at work. If we resent it, it will crush us. But if we embrace it with trust, it becomes the hammer and anvil of the divine blacksmith, hammering away impurities and shaping us into a sharp, useful tool in his hands. One day, Jesus visited the workshop of a blacksmith named Elia, who was lamenting his difficult life. Jesus picked up a rough piece of iron and asked, "Elia, how does this iron become a shining sword?" Elia replied, "Sir, it must be heated in a hot fire, then placed on an anvil and struck many times with a hammer." Jesus gently said, "So it is with your life. The trials you call misfortune, I call the forge and the hammer. Do not fear them. It is through them that your soul, from a rough piece of iron, will be forged to become strong and bright." 3. Following the Lord is not mechanical imitation, but participation in His life. Following the Lord does not mean we all must become preachers or perform great miracles. To follow the Lord is to let His love flow in our veins, to let His wisdom illuminate our decisions, whether we are a mother, a teacher, or a worker. Each person's path is unique, but the guiding spirit is one. The Apostle John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, once quietly asked him, "Teacher, what must I do to be like you?" Jesus pointed to 2 olive trees by the road. "John, look, both trees draw from the same water in the earth, receive the same sunlight from above. But one branch reaches to the east, the other casts its shadow to the west. Each tree has its own shape. You do not need to become a copy of me. You only need to root yourself deeply in the love of our Father and let my light shine upon you. Then you will bear fruit with your own flavor, yet sweet with the taste of the kingdom of heaven." 4. True freedom lies in submission, not in absolute self-determination. The world mistakenly believes that freedom is doing whatever one wants, but in chasing every desire, we become slaves to them. True freedom, paradoxically, is found when we align our will with the loving will of God. Just as a ship is truly free when it raises its sails to the wind, not when it sits idly in the harbor. Jesus explained this to a rich young man who asked, "What must I do to be free and at peace?" Jesus replied, "A bird is free when it soars in the sky, not when it struggles in a gilded cage. Your own will is that gilded cage, while the will of my Father is the entire sky. You think that holding on to your possessions and your will is freedom, but you are actually imprisoning yourself. Dare to open the cage door, entrust your flight path to the Father in heaven, and you will know what true freedom is." 5. The weight of the cross is lightened by the power of love. The same task, if done out of duty, will be a burden. But if done out of love, it becomes a gift. Caring for a sick person, listening to someone who is sad, forgiving someone who has hurt us, all become lighter when we see the image of God in them and act with a heart full of love. A woman named Salome complained to Jesus that the burden of caring for her family and elderly parents exhausted her. Jesus sat beside her, took her calloused hands and said, "Salome, when you draw a bucket of water, if you only think of its weight, your shoulders will sag. But if you think of the joy of your loved one who is about to drink a cool sip, the bucket suddenly becomes light. Do not look at the burden of the work. Look at the love you put into it. Love is the wings that lift every cross." 6. The cross must be carried daily, not just in times of crisis. The path of following the Lord is not a sprint, but a marathon. Holiness is not found in momentary heroic acts, but in faithfulness in the small things repeated every day. A short prayer, an act of patience, a choice for truth over deceit. The Apostle Andrew once asked, "Teacher, what great deeds must we do to show our faith?" Jesus pointed to the fishermen, mending their nets by the lake. "Andrew, look, no one praises the mending of nets, but if they are not patient in mending each small tear every day, they will catch no fish when they go out to sea. Your faith is the same. It is not built by great miracles, but by faithfulness in every small daily task. Mend the tears of patience, of kindness, of forgiveness, every day. That is how you prepare for a great catch for the kingdom of heaven." 7. To carry another's cross is to walk beside Christ. God does not want us to be solitary ascetics. He wants us to build a community of love. When we bend down to lift a fallen brother, when we share the material or spiritual burden of a sister, it is then that we are carrying the cross with Jesus himself. On a sunny road, Jesus and his disciples saw a farmer struggling to push a donkey cart stuck in the mud. Some disciples were about to walk around it. Jesus stopped, rolled up his sleeves, and helped the farmer push the cart. When the wheel was rolling again, he turned to his disciples and said, "When you see someone struggling under a heavy burden, do not think it is their burden alone. It is a part of my cross present before your eyes. Whoever helps them, helps me." 8. To deny oneself is to silence the noise of the world to hear the whisper of God. Our ego constantly screams, demanding attention, recognition, and satisfaction. This noise deafens us to the gentle voice of the Holy Spirit. Practicing self-denial is to cultivate an inner silence, so that in the quiet of our hearts, we can hear his subtle and loving guidance. Thomas, the doubter, said to Jesus, "Teacher, how can I know God's will amidst so many thoughts in my head?" Jesus led him to a stream. "Thomas, look at the water's surface. When the current is strong and turbulent, you see nothing but ripples. But when the water is still, you can clearly see the sky and your own reflection. So it is with your soul. When it is filled with worries, ambitions, and fears, it is turbulent, and you cannot hear the Father's voice. Practice denying those waves. Let your soul be still. In that silence, the Father's will shall appear as clearly as the sky in a calm lake. 9. The shape of your cross is unique to you. One of the greatest temptations is to compare our cross with others. We might think our burden is heavier, or conversely, feel guilty because our life seems easier. But God, in his wisdom, gives each person a cross designed specifically for them, fitting their strength and necessary for the growth of their soul. A man named Joseph complained to the Lord, "Why must I endure this trial while my neighbor seems to live so peacefully?" Jesus replied, "Joseph, a carpenter does not use the same chisel for every type of wood. For softwood, he uses a different tool than for hardwood. A gardener does not care for a grapevine the same way he cares for a fig tree. The Father in heaven is the great carpenter, the great gardener. He knows what material your soul is made of and how it needs to be shaped to bear the best fruit. Do not compare your cross. Trust that it was made out of love and is meant for you alone. 10. The shadow of the cross always falls toward the light of the resurrection. This is the most important philosophy. Carrying the cross is never a hopeless journey or a dead end. It always and necessarily leads to new life. Every suffering embraced in faith, every sacrifice made for love, is a seed sown in the earth. Though it may pass through the darkness of death, it will surely sprout in the glorious light of the resurrection. The cross is the door to an eternal dawn. Before the Passion, in Bethany, Mary Magdalene expressed her anxiety about the future. Jesus held a grain of wheat in his palm and said to her, "Mary, look at this grain. If it remains in my hand, it will always be just one grain. But if it accepts to die, to be buried in the dark earth, it will decay, and from it will grow a new wheat plant, bearing many grains. Do not be afraid of the coming darkness. The path I am about to take may seem like a path of loss, but it is the only way for new life to burst forth for everyone. After every Good Friday, there is always an Easter dawn. 11. The heaviest part of any cross is the wood of our own resistance. The burden itself is a challenge, but our complaints, our self-pity, and the question, "Why me?" are the invisible weights that are added, making our shoulders sag. Acceptance in trust does not make the cross disappear, but it makes the burden miraculously lighter. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus and his disciples saw two men carrying logs that looked equally heavy. One man walked heavily, his face grimaced, constantly muttering bitter words. The other, though also sweating, walked steadily, humming a tune. Andrew asked, "Teacher, why do their burdens look the same, yet one man struggles so much more than the other?" Jesus replied, "Andrew, your eyes see only the logs, but the Father in heaven sees the hearts. The true weight is not in the log, but in how one carries it. One carries it with rebellion, the other with surrender. It is the resistance from within that is the burden no one can carry for you." 12. To deny oneself is to plant a tree under whose shade you may never sit. This is the highest form of hope and selfless love. To act for a future we may not see. To sow for a generation to come. It is the renunciation of the right to immediate reward in order to build a legacy of love. A young zealot, burning with the desire to overthrow the occupying forces, came to Jesus. He led him to an old man who was diligently planting a young olive tree. The young man said, "Old man, you will not live long enough to see this tree bear fruit." The old man smiled. Jesus turned to the young man and said, "You want to build the kingdom of heaven with swords in a day, but the kingdom is built by the patient actions of those who dare to plant trees for others, to enjoy the shade and taste the sweet fruit. That is to renounce one's own glory for the happiness of others." 13. Your cross is also a bridge to the heart of another. When we dare to be authentic about our weaknesses, when we do not hide our wounds and struggles, we create a space for empathy. Shared vulnerability becomes a bridge connecting souls, creating a true community. After following Jesus, Matthew the tax collector still felt isolated by his past. He tried to show that he had completely changed. Jesus said to him, "Matthew, do not hide your scars. People will not come to you because of your perfection, but they will come because they see in you someone who has fallen like them and has been healed. Your past cross, when carried in humility, will become a bridge for other outcasts to dare to cross and find hope." 14. To follow the teacher is to step out of the tomb of the past. We all have our own tombs, failures, sins, and regrets in which we imprison ourselves. Jesus' invitation is a call to resurrection in the present moment. It is the courage to roll away the stone of guilt from the tomb of our soul and step into the light of forgiveness and a new beginning. A woman who always came to the well at noon to avoid everyone was haunted by her past mistakes. Jesus met her there. He did not ask about her past, only said, "The water from this well will make you thirsty again, but the water I give will become a river flowing forever. Leave your water jar here." His meaning was profound. Leave the burden of your past and the shame that this jar represents, and walk as a new person. 15. The cross of misunderstanding is carried by speaking the truth in love. When you walk the path of righteousness, there will surely be those who do not understand and judge you. To carry this cross means to endure that misunderstanding without bitterness, continuing to act and speak with a loving heart, not to prove yourself right, but to bear witness to the truth. When the Pharisees condemned Jesus for healing on the Sabbath, the disciples were very angry. That evening he told them, "Shining a light in the darkness will naturally disturb those who love the darkness. The price of truth is opposition, but do not carry that opposition with swords or anger. Carry it with a peaceful heart and steadfast love. That is the cross of a witness." 16. To renounce self-satisfaction is to discover fulfillment from God. Pride whispers to us that we can handle everything on our own. But divine strength truly begins when we reach our own limits, when we dare to admit our weakness and trust completely in God's power. Before his arrest, Peter strongly declared, "Even if all fall away, I will not." Jesus looked at him with compassion. "Peter, your strength is like a sword. It will fail you. But the strength I give is like a net. It only works when you dare to cast it far, trusting in what you cannot see. Stop trusting in your own strength so that the Father's power may be revealed." 17. The silence of God is also a cross. It teaches faith how to walk in the dark. There are periods in life when our prayers seem to go unanswered and heaven seems silent. This is a profound test of faith. This cross strips away a faith based on feelings and builds a pure faith based on absolute trust, even without evidence. As they passed through Jericho, the disciples heard the blind man Bartimaeus crying out for mercy. James said, "He has been crying out like that for so long." Jesus replied, "Sometimes the Father is silent, not because he does not hear, but because he wants the cry of faith to become stronger, strong enough to tear through the darkness. Patient waiting is also a prayer. It is in the darkness of that silence that a person's faith is refined like gold in the fire. 18. To follow the teacher is to learn to wash feet, especially the feet of those who will turn away. This is the pinnacle of selfless service, expecting no reward or loyalty. It requires a renunciation of the ego's desire to be loved and recognized, leaving only pure love. At the Last Supper, when Jesus went to wash Judas's feet, John whispered, "Teacher, you know what he is going to do. Why do you still do this?" Jesus quietly replied, "John, the sun shines on the good and the evil alike. The rain waters both good plants and weeds. The love of the kingdom of heaven is not a transaction. I do not serve because people are worthy, but because it is the nature of love. I wash their feet because they are dirty, not because they will walk on a straight path." 19. Your cross is not only your burdens, but also the talents you are afraid to use. Sometimes our cross is the responsibility that comes with the gifts God has given us. We fear others' expectations, fear failure, fear stepping out of our comfort zone. To carry the cross also means to courageously embrace the full potential that God has placed within us. A young man in Bethany had a beautiful voice, but never dared to sing in the synagogue because he was too shy. Jesus spoke to him privately. "A seed that is given, if you bury it under the soil of fear, will forever remain a seed. But if you dare to sow it into the air with courage, it will become a tree of song, and its shade will shelter many other souls. Do not let your fear turn God's gift into a hidden cross." 20. To deny oneself is to exchange your map for the teacher's compass. We often have a map for our lives with detailed plans and predetermined routes. Following the Lord means having the courage to put that map away and trust in the compass of the Holy Spirit, which guides us one step at a time, even when the final destination is still unclear. Philip, a practical-minded man, asked Jesus, "Teacher, what is our plan for the next 6 months? Where will we go?" Jesus pointed to a shepherd leading his flock across a hillside. "Philip, the shepherd does not give the flock a map of the whole valley. He simply calls, and the sheep recognize his voice and follow, heading toward the next green pasture. Listen to my voice today. That is all the guidance you need for today." Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 21. To carry the cross is to learn the language of patience, trusting that dawn will come after the longest night. The world wants everything instantly, but the kingdom of heaven has its own rhythm, the rhythm of a seed quietly sprouting underground. To carry the cross of waiting is to surrender our control over time and trust in the wisdom of God's timing. When Lazarus fell ill, Martha and Mary sent for Jesus, but he did not come immediately. Martha, in her grief, said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus replied with deep love, "Martha, your waiting was not my forgetting. Sometimes the seed must be buried deep in the soil of silence and loss, so that the life that springs from it can become a greater sign for all. Your patience is the fertile ground for the Father's miracles." 22. To follow the teacher is to stoop down to find holiness in the small, ordinary things. People often look for God in grand events, in great miracles. But Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven is present in the smallest acts of love and sacrifice. While sitting opposite the treasury in the temple, he watched the rich put in large sums. But then he called his disciples over when a poor widow put in only 2 small coins. He said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." The cross of sacrifice is not measured by sud, but by the degree of love. 23. To deny oneself is to give up the desire to be proven right in order to choose the path of reconciliation. Our ego always wants to win arguments, to have the last word. But following the Lord is to place unity and love above the pride of being right. Peter asked Jesus, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother?" Instead of giving a number, Jesus told him the parable of the unforgiving servant, who was forgiven a huge debt by his king, but refused to forgive his friend a small one. He concluded, "Do you want to hold on to your own righteousness, or do you want to participate in the mercy of my Father?" To renounce the right to be angry is the most difficult cross, but also the most glorious. 24. To carry the cross is to accept that God's goodness transcends human fairness. We live with a transactional idea of fairness. Do more, get more. Do less, get less. The cross is when we must face the reality that God's mercy does not operate on that logic. It is a free gift, and that challenges our pride. Jesus told the parable of the workers in the vineyard, where those who worked from early morning and those who worked only the last hour all received the same wage. The first workers protested. Jesus explained, "I am not being unfair to you. Do I not have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? To carry the cross is to rejoice when others are blessed, even when you think you deserve more. It is to abandon comparison, to live in the freedom of grace." 25. To follow the teacher is to become a sign of contradiction to the values of the world. The world honors wealth, power, and self-satisfaction. The way of the cross is the opposite. It honors poverty, meekness, and humility. To be a disciple is to accept living a life that seems upside down in the eyes of the world. While sitting on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, Jesus delivered the Beatitudes. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness." Each statement was a reversal of the world's values. He told his disciples, "The world will not understand you. They will call meekness weakness, forgiveness foolishness. Living by these values is your daily cross and the salt that seasons the earth." 26. To carry one's cross is to dare to drink the cup that the Father gives. There will be times in life when the path ahead is full of suffering, and we know it. The choice not to run, but to accept it in surrender to the Father's loving plan, is the pinnacle of obedience and self-denial. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the Passion, Jesus' soul was so troubled that his sweat became like drops of blood. He prayed, "Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." That is the voice of human nature. But then he continued, "Yet not as I will, but as you will." He taught his disciples the final lesson of the cross. It is absolute trust in the Father's love, even when that love leads through the valley of the shadow of death. 27. To follow the teacher is to allow oneself to become bread for others, to be broken and given away. The purpose of self-denial is not to become empty, but to be filled with the Spirit of God, so that our very lives can nourish others. We become a source of hope, comfort, and strength for those around us, even when it requires our own sacrifice. After the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves, the people followed him. Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life." He then explained to the disciples, just as this bread must be broken to be distributed, the life of a disciple must be willing to be broken, their time, energy, security, to feed their brothers. To carry the cross is to allow oneself to be consumed for love. 28. To renounce your fear is the first step out of the boat. The boat represents safety, the familiar, what we can control. The stormy sea is uncertainty, the call of faith. Following the Lord requires us to renounce our inherent fear and dare to walk on the water of trust. When the disciples saw Jesus walking on the sea, they were terrified. But Peter said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus said only one word, "Come." Peter renounced the safety of the boat. Although he later faltered, the moment he stepped out was a great act of carrying the cross of conquering inner fear with faith in an outer call. 29. The cross connects your personal story to God's great story of salvation. Our sufferings and trials often seem meaningless and isolating, but when placed in the light of faith, we realize they are not random. They are God's way of allowing us to participate in the passion of His own Son, turning the story of our lives into a part of the epic of salvation. On the road to Emmaus, 2 disciples were disappointed and sad. The resurrected Jesus appeared to them, but they did not recognize Him. He asked them, then explained, "Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter His glory?" Then He used the Scriptures to explain to them everything that was said about Him. Immediately, the cross was no longer a tragedy, but a fulfillment of a promise. So it is with each of our crosses. It has a meaning in God's great plan. 30. The final renunciation is to entrust oneself in death, which is the threshold to life. All the self-denials and cross-carrying in life are a preparation for the final and greatest act of renunciation, surrendering one's life into the hands of the Father. This is not an end, but a passage, a transition from finite life to eternal life. Hanging on the cross, amidst extreme pain, Jesus uttered His final words, not of complaint, but of absolute surrender. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." This is the culmination of all philosophies. He showed that the way of the cross, beginning with the renunciation of small things, ends with the giving of life itself, not to lose it, but to find it again, whole and eternal, in the loving embrace of God. 31. To follow the teacher is to learn to witness through silence when words become powerless. There are sorrows and truths that cannot be expressed in words. In those circumstances, a steadfast presence, a hand to hold, a shared tear becomes a more powerful witness than any sermon. To carry the cross is sometimes simply to remain, to endure with others in silence. Andrew, not an orator like Peter, often felt inadequate. He told Jesus, "I don't know the lofty words to persuade others." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Andrew, when a storm passes, the tree does not scream. It just roots itself deeper and stands firm. Human words can be carried away by the wind, but a life lived in silent love and service is an unshakable mountain. There are souls that can only be won by your faithful presence, not by words." That is the sermon of silence. 32. To deny oneself is to give up the need to have all the answers. The human mind craves clarity, wanting to know why for every suffering. But faith is not about having all the answers, but about trusting the One who holds all the answers. To carry the cross is to accept living with mystery and to find peace not in understanding, but in trust. A man whose only son had died came to Jesus, his face etched with the question, "Why?" He did not say it, but Jesus knew. He did not offer a theological explanation. He just sat beside him in silence for a long time, then said, "I did not come to explain the darkness. I came to sit with you in it until the light returns. Your peace is not found in understanding why you lost it, but in knowing that I am here with you." 33. The cross is often found in the ordinariness of the kitchen, not just on the mountain of transfiguration. We tend to seek extraordinary spiritual experiences, moments of ecstasy. But most of the path to holiness is paved with the stones of the ordinary. Patience when a child cries, honesty in a small transaction, kindness to a difficult neighbor. It is the transformation of these ordinary things with an extraordinary love that is true spirituality. After witnessing the transfiguration on Mount Tabor, Peter, James, and John were still ecstatic. On the way down, they met a mother comforting a fussy child. Peter seemed impatient. Jesus said, "Peter, the glory you saw on the mountain is to give you strength in this valley. It is easy to see me in radiant light. The real test is whether you can see me in this child's cry and that mother's fatigue. To find holiness in ordinary things, that is the greatest miracle." 34. One of the hardest crosses to bear is to forgive oneself. We can easily believe in God's mercy for others, but find it very difficult to apply it to our own failures and weaknesses. We crucify ourselves on the cross of guilt and shame. To carry the cross is to accept that God's forgiveness is greater than our own condemnation. After Peter denied the teacher 3 times, he wept bitterly. Even after the resurrection, he carried a sense of guilt. On the seashore, the resurrected Jesus did not mention his sin. He only asked 3 times, "Simon, do you love me?" Each time Peter answered yes, Jesus gave him a new mission: feed my sheep. He did not make him carry the cross of his sin. He transformed it into the cross of a restored mission and love. 35. To deny oneself is to break down the wall of us versus them. The natural human instinct is to divide the world into groups, same race, same religion, same opinion. Following the Lord is a revolution against this instinct, to see in every person, no matter how different, a brother or sister, a child of the same Father. When passing through a Samaritan village, the villagers did not welcome them. James and John were angry and said, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" Jesus turned and rebuked them. "You do not know what kind of spirit you are of. The Son of Man did not come to destroy, but to save." He taught them that the disciples' cross is to endure rejection without seeking revenge, and to abandon the boundary of them, to open one's heart to infinity. 36. The cross is not for destruction, but is a pruning shear, so you can bear more fruit. No one likes to be pruned. It is painful and seems like a loss. But a gardener knows that for a vine to bear good fruit, useless branches and wild shoots must be cut away. The trials and sacrifices in the life of faith are the same. They cut away what is unnecessary, so that the life of God in us can be stronger and more fruitful. In a garden, Jesus told his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener." He then explained, "He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." The cross is not a sign of hatred, but a sign of the special care of the gardener, who sees the potential for fruit that the branch itself has not yet realized. 37. To follow the teacher is to learn to recognize his face in the face of a stranger. It is easy to love God in prayer, in the synagogue. The real challenge is to recognize his presence in the poor, the stranger, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned. Every time we serve one of the least of these brothers, we are serving him. An expert in the law asked Jesus about his neighbor. Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan. He later added to his disciples, "You are not only called to be the Samaritan, you are also called to recognize me lying on the roadside, stripped and beaten. The cross of compassion is to stop, stoop down, and bind the wounds of me." 38. The cross of repeated weaknesses teaches us humility and reliance. We are often disappointed in ourselves when we keep falling into the same sin, the same weakness. We want to be strong and perfect immediately. But this cross of imperfection is a great teacher. It shatters our pride and forces us to rely completely on God's grace instead of our own strength. Nicodemus came to Jesus at night, confused by his own internal struggles. Jesus told him, "The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit." He implied that spiritual growth is not a straight line that we control. Accepting our weakness and allowing God's grace to work in it, even when we see no progress, is a profound act of faith. 39. To deny oneself is to abandon the comfort of prejudice. Prejudice gives us a false sense of security. It simplifies the world and allows us to judge others without having to love or understand them. Following the Lord is a continual journey of breaking our own prejudices to see everyone with his clear eyes. When Jesus called Matthew a tax collector, the other disciples were surprised and somewhat displeased. That evening, while eating with those considered sinners, he said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." The cross is to sit at the same table with those whom your prejudice tells you to avoid. 40. In the storm of emotions, the cross is the anchor of truth. Our emotions change like the weather. Happy today, sad tomorrow. Fervent today, cold tomorrow. If our faith is based only on feelings, it will be swept away. The cross is a reminder of unchanging truths: God's love, His promises, the way of truth. It is the anchor that holds the ship of our soul steady. When the disciples' boat was caught in a storm on the lake, they panicked. Jesus was asleep. When they woke him, he rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. Then he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" He wanted to teach them that his presence in the boat, the truth of faith, is more important than the strength of the storm outside, the chaos of emotions and circumstances. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 41. To follow the teacher is to be a peacemaker, not just a peacekeeper. A peacekeeper often avoids conflict at all costs, sometimes by remaining silent in the face of injustice. A peacemaker, in contrast, courageously steps into conflict, confronting the truth even if it is uncomfortable, to heal brokenness at its root and create true harmony. That is a much harder cross. The disciples often argued about who was the greatest. Jesus did not just tell them to stop arguing to keep the peace. He placed a child in their midst and challenged their entire value system. He broke a false peace based on power to build a true peace based on humility and service. He taught them that the cross of the peacemaker is to dare to speak uncomfortable truths for the sake of love. 42. The cross of unfulfilled dreams teaches us to seek a greater fruitfulness. Each of us has dreams and plans for our lives. But sometimes God's plan is different. Carrying the cross of closed doors, of unfulfilled desires, is a pain. But it is in that barrenness, if we trust, that God can sow seeds of a spiritual fruitfulness we never expected. A woman named Hannah, who was barren and always sad, came to hear Jesus preach. Afterwards, she approached him privately. He listened to her pain and said, "Hannah, a field that cannot grow wheat does not mean it is useless. Perhaps my father wants to plant olive trees on it, to provide oil to soothe the wounds of many. Do not measure the fruitfulness of your life by physical children, but by the souls you can comfort and heal with your love. 43. To deny oneself is to quiet the voice of the crowd, to better hear the voice of the shepherd. The crowd is fickle, one day shouting, "Hosanna," the next screaming, "Crucify him." Following the voice of the crowd to be accepted is the wide road. The way of the cross is the narrow road of listening and being faithful to the one voice of the shepherd, even if it means walking alone. When Pilate brought Jesus before the crowd and offered to release him, the crowd, incited by others, chose Barabbas. Jesus remained silent. He taught the disciples the final lesson of renunciation: to renounce the world's approval, to renounce the crowd's judgment, and to be faithful only to the Father's truth. The cross is solitude in a noisy world. 44. The cross of old age is a shedding of physical strength to be clothed in the wisdom of the soul. Society glorifies youth and strength. Old age, with its physical decline, is seen as a burden. But in the spirituality of the cross, it is a period of grace. It is an opportunity to let go of clinging to power, appearance, and worldly achievements, to become lighter, more transparent, and closer to eternity. Jesus met the old man Simeon in the temple. He had been waiting long for the Messiah. When he held the baby Jesus, he said, "Now, Lord, you can let your servant go in peace." Jesus later explained to his disciples, Simeon's body grew weak, but the eyes of his soul were brighter than ever. The cross of old age is a blessed exchange, losing the strength of earth to receive the clarity of heaven. 45. To follow the teacher is to carry the world's sorrows in your heart through prayer. As we mature in faith, our hearts become more sensitive, not only to our own pain, but to the pain of all humanity. To carry the cross is not to turn away from news of war, poverty, and injustice. Instead, we bring them into our prayer, becoming an intercessor, standing in the breach between God and humanity. Some nights, the disciples saw Jesus go off to a quiet place to pray. They thought he was only praying for his mission. But one time, John overheard him sobbing the names of people, cities, and sufferings they had never known. John understood that his teacher's heart was big enough to hold the whole world. The disciples' cross is to allow one's heart to be expanded by love, to the point that it aches with the pain of others. 46. To deny oneself is like a grain of wheat, accepting to die to its own identity, to become part of the common bread. A grain of wheat has its own identity. But to become life-giving bread, it must be crushed, lose its old form, and mix with thousands of other grains. The Christian community is the same. It requires us to renounce our individual ego, our personal preferences, our rigid opinions, to become together one body, one bread broken for the world. Before the multiplication of the loaves, Jesus took the 5 loaves. He told his disciples, "These are just 5 separate loaves, but after being blessed, broken, and distributed, they will become a meal for a whole crowd." He was teaching that to carry the cross is to accept being crushed by the friction of community life, so that our I may die and a unified we may be born. 47. To carry the cross is to renounce the illusion of control. We try to control everything: our health, our finances, our future, others' opinions of us. Our anxiety largely comes from the fact that these things are beyond our control. To carry the cross is the act of letting go, acknowledging that there is only one who is truly in control, and entrusting our lives to His loving providence. When the disciples worried about what to eat and what to wear, Jesus pointed to the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. He was not saying not to work. He was saying not to let anxiety about controlling the future strangle your life today. Do your part and entrust the rest. The cross is the peace that comes from releasing the burden of control. 48. The cross of joy is to dare to be happy without guilt in a suffering world. This is a paradoxical philosophy. We often think that a spiritual life must be solemn. Sometimes, carrying the cross is to dare to accept the joys God gives, to dare to laugh, to celebrate, and to see it as a sign of the kingdom of heaven, an act of hope. At the wedding at Cana, when the wine ran out, Mary told Jesus. The disciples might have thought it a trivial matter, not worthy of the teacher's attention amidst so many great things. But Jesus performed His first miracle not to heal or cast out a demon, but to save a celebration. He taught that in a world full of tears, a little wine of joy is a precious gift. To carry the cross is sometimes to have the courage to celebrate the goodness of life as an act of defiance against the darkness. 49. Following the teacher is a dance between action and contemplation. Some think following the Lord is only action, ceaseless service. Others think it is only contemplation, ceaseless prayer. But Jesus showed a perfect balance. He healed the crowds, action, then withdrew to the mountain to pray, contemplation. To carry the cross is to learn when to step forward and when to step back, when to speak and when to be silent, when to give and when to be filled. After a long day of serving the people, the disciples were exhausted. Jesus said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." He taught them that action without contemplation leads to burnout and disorientation. Contemplation without action becomes selfish and fruitless. The cross is to keep the rhythm of this sacred dance. 50. The cross is empty. Its purpose is fulfilled in the resurrection. This is the final philosophy and the beginning of everything. We do not worship an instrument of torture. We proclaim an empty tomb. The cross is not the destination. It is the door. All suffering, all self-denial, all burdens carried in faith do not end in death, but always point toward and find their full meaning in the light of an Easter morning. Mary Magdalene wept at the empty tomb. She was still looking for a dead body. The angel asked her, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" Then the risen Christ Himself appeared to her. At that moment, the tragic cross of Friday was forever transformed in meaning. It was no longer a symbol of failure, but a symbol of the greatest victory. To carry our cross is also to walk with the unshakable conviction that this path, however thorny, will not end on a skull hill, but in a radiant garden at the dawn of eternal life. 51. To carry the cross is to dare to live an anonymous life, where holiness is known to no one but God. The world craves recognition, likes, and praise. But the greatest acts of love are mostly performed in secret. A mother staying up late with a sick child, a janitor working with full dedication, someone silently praying for their enemy. To carry the cross is to renounce the need for recognition and find joy in the singular gaze of the Father, who sees what is done in secret. One day in the temple, the disciples were admiring the great pillars and magnificent stones. Jesus pointed them to a widow who was quietly cleaning a forgotten corner of the courtyard. He said, "You see all these great structures? They will be thrown down. But this woman's quiet cleaning, done with a pure heart, is building a stone for the kingdom of heaven, a stone that will never be shaken. The greatest glory is often hidden in the deepest humility. 52. To deny oneself is to renounce the right to be angry, even when that anger seems justified. When treated unjustly, our natural instinct is anger and a demand for justice. Righteous anger can be a motivator, but if we cling to it, it becomes a poison that corrodes the soul. To carry the cross is a supernatural act, to choose the path of mercy and forgiveness, even when we have every reason to be resentful. Seeing the merchants turning the temple into a marketplace, the disciples, especially Simon the Zealot, were furious. After Jesus overturned their tables, the disciples were still fired up. But Jesus led them outside and said, "Anger is like a fire. It can purify for a moment, but if you hold on to it, it will burn down the temple of your own soul." The cross is not about fighting fire with fire, but about extinguishing it with the water of mercy. 53. The cross of intergenerational love is to be a bridge connecting the past and the future. In life, many find themselves stretched between caring for aging parents and raising young children. It is a heavy cross that drains one's strength, but seen from above, these are not two burdens, but one sacred mission: to be a living link of love, passing on the wisdom of the past and nurturing hope for the future. A woman named Rebecca, her shoulders heavy, came to confide in Jesus. He said to her, "Rebecca, you are not carrying two separate burdens. You are weaving a tapestry. The threads from the past are your parents. The threads for the future are your children. Your hands, with patience and sacrifice, are creating a work of art of love, a tapestry on which your family's story becomes part of God's story." 54. To follow the teacher is to dare to enter the unclean places the world shuns. Pharisaical holiness is about building fences to keep oneself pure, far from sinners. But the holiness of Jesus is about tearing down those walls, proactively going into the darkest and dirtiest places of society to bring light and healing. To carry the cross is to accept being soiled for love in order to save others. When Jesus decided to go to the house of Zacchaeus, a sinful tax collector, the disciples and the crowd grumbled. Peter tried to dissuade him. "Teacher, entering such a man's house will make you unclean." Jesus replied, "Peter, a doctor cannot heal if he is afraid of germs. Light cannot shine if it is afraid of the dark. I have not come to call the righteous, but to seek and to save the lost. My cross is not a protected purity, but a love that dares to engage." 55. The cross of the body is learning to worship God through one's limitations and pain. We often think of worship as acts of a healthy body, kneeling, singing, working. But for the sick, for those with chronic pain, that ailing body itself can become an altar. To carry the cross of illness is to offer God our very fragility, our powerlessness, and to turn every difficult breath into a living prayer. A man who had been paralyzed for many years heard Jesus preaching. He could not get close. Later, Jesus sought him out. The man said through his tears, "I can do nothing for you, Lord." Jesus replied, "My friend, your patience in pain is a hymn. Your hope in the darkness is an offering. You are carrying a cross that many healthy people are not strong enough to bear. Your body is a powerful testimony to the strength of God made perfect in weakness." 56. To deny oneself is to renounce spiritual greed. to seek God alone and not His gifts. There is a subtle greed in the spiritual life, a craving for more spiritual experiences, consolations, signs. We risk loving the gifts more than the giver. To carry the cross is to accept periods of dryness, times when the soul feels like a desert, and still remain faithful in loving God simply because He is God, not for the good feelings He provides. Mary of Bethany often sat at Jesus' feet and listened, but there were also times her soul felt empty. She said to the Lord, "Why do I feel nothing today?" Jesus smiled. "Mary, do you love the sun for its warmth? Or do you love the sun itself, even on cloudy days?" True love is tested not in the sweetness of consolation, but in the faithfulness of the dark night. To renounce the need to feel, "My presence is the way to come closer to me than ever before." 57. The cross of intellectual humility is to dare to say, "I don't know," before the mysteries of God. The human intellect wants to build perfect theological systems, clear answers for every problem. But God is always greater than our concepts. To carry the cross is to accept the limits of human reason, to kneel in awe before mystery, and to realize that the path to God is not through the head, but through the heart. A learned scribe from Jerusalem came to test Jesus with complex questions about the law and angels. Jesus listened patiently, then simply told him a parable about a lost child who was found. Finally, he said, "You have built a towering tower of knowledge, but you have forgotten the door on the ground floor. That door is love." There are questions of the intellect that can only be answered by an act of the heart. 58. To follow the teacher is to accept walking with a sacred limp. In the scriptures, Jacob wrestled with God, and afterward, he limped for the rest of his life. A true encounter with God often does not make us flawlessly perfect. On the contrary, it often leaves a wound, a deep awareness of our own weakness, a humility that never fades. That wound becomes the place where God's grace seeps in. A disciple felt a great sense of failure after making a major mistake. Jesus spoke to him privately. "Do you remember our father Jacob? He saw the face of God, and he limped. Do not be ashamed of your limp. It is a reminder that you have dared to wrestle with great things. It keeps you humble. It makes you merciful to others who are also limping. Carry your limp as a mark of love." 59. The cross of consistency is the silent, long march after the initial enthusiasm has faded. Starting a new path is always exciting, but to walk it to the end, through the monotonous, repetitive days, when there is no more inspiration, that is the real test. This is the cross of faithfulness, of perseverance. It is not beautiful, not glamorous, but it is the backbone of the disciple's life. A few years after following Jesus, some disciples began to feel tired of the wandering life. One of them said, "Every day is the same, teacher." Jesus pointed to a farmer plowing a field. "Look, he doesn't plow one furrow and then leave. He patiently finishes one after another, day after day. The harvest does not come from one day of enthusiastic work, but from many months of silent persistence. Your faithfulness in the small, repetitive things is the strength that will bring a great harvest for the kingdom." 60. To deny oneself is to renounce despair, and to actively choose hope as an act of will. When faced with overwhelming evil, crushing failure, with a seemingly endless darkness, our self wants to give up, to sink into despair. Hope, in those circumstances, is not a feeling, but a decision. It is an act of renouncing the call of the abyss to believe in the promise of the dawn. In the final week, knowing full well what was about to happen, the disciples became terrified and confused. At the Last Supper, Jesus showed no despair. On the contrary, he instituted the Eucharist, an act of absolute hope and a promise to remain. He said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." It was not advice. It was a command of love. To carry the cross is when all reasons to believe have vanished. Yet we still choose to believe in the one who is hope itself. 61. The cross of a leader is the loneliness of responsibility. For those responsible for others, parents, teachers, community leaders, the cross has a particular shape. It is the burden of making difficult decisions for the good of the group, often without agreement, even with misunderstanding and criticism. It is the loneliness of the shepherd who must keep watch alone in the night. A synagogue leader came to Jesus, troubled about a decision concerning his community. Jesus told him, "The shepherd walks ahead of the flock. He faces the wind and dew first. He sees the wolf first. Sometimes he must lead the flock on a rocky path to avoid an abyss they cannot see. They will complain, but he must go on." The loneliness of a leader is the cross of love, a love that dares to see beyond immediate comfort. 62. To follow the teacher, in the end, is not just to carry a cross, but to become a living cross. This is the final philosophy, gathering all others. The life of a disciple, through all renunciation and sacrifice, is called to become a sign. Just as a cross has a vertical beam and a horizontal beam, so does our life. The vertical beam is our relationship with God, a love directed straight to heaven. The horizontal beam is our relationship with others, a love that stretches out to embrace the whole world. We are called to become the living intersection of these two dimensions of love. In his final teachings, Jesus stretched out his hands to the disciples. He said, "As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." With that gesture, he showed them their ultimate calling, not just to follow him, not just to carry an external object, but to let their very being be crucified by love, to become a cross, a crossroads where heaven meets earth, where the love of God flows through us to our brothers and sisters. That is the destination, the glory, and the full meaning of the journey. So we have journeyed together through a long contemplation, with 62 perspectives on the eternal call of Jesus. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Through each philosophy, each story, it is hoped that you have felt one thing. The cross is not a symbol of an end, but a sign of infinite love and a new beginning. It is not a meaningless burden, but the only path that leads to true freedom, where our small self gives way for the very life of God to flourish. What form does your and my cross take today? Perhaps it is a patient word when we want to be harsh. Perhaps it is a forgiveness we feel we don't have the strength to give. Perhaps it is a quiet task that no one acknowledges. Or simply, the courage to face a deep-seated fear and place it in God's hands. Whatever shape your cross takes, please remember, you never have to carry it alone. For Christ himself, who has gone before, is also walking beside you, in step with you, sharing the same burden. Dear friends, our contemplative journey will not stop here. Which of the 62 philosophies touched your heart the most? Please share your feelings and reflections in the comments section below so that we can build a community of listening and sharing together. If these moments of reflection have been meaningful to you, please give Church Audio Like and share this video with your friends and family, so that God's Word and these reflections can become a source of comfort, strength, and light for many souls in need. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, so you won't miss any future journeys of deep contemplation. Thank you sincerely for listening and for journeying with us. May the peace of the risen Christ, who conquered the cross and death, be with us all. Church Audio bids you farewell and looks forward to seeing you again, but 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 to seeing you again.